How's it going, everyone? My name is Thomas Skrull and I am a photographer based in the Toronto area. I know it has been a very long time since I've uploaded anything to this channel, so for those of you that are old subscribers or have asked me to put out a video in the past, here it is. And for those of you that may be new to this channel, I hope you take away something from this video. Since we are going to be stuck at home for the next little bit, I figured I'd put out a tutorial of something that all of you can do at home. And since I know a lot of you are film photographers, I figured why not highlight my own approach to developing black and white film. So I want to first point out that I know that there are a ton of really good YouTube tutorials already on how to develop black and white film at home. The reason I feel like I want to highlight my process is because a lot of those tutorials have dedicated spaces, they have every piece of equipment imaginable, and I feel like that can be intimidating when you first start out. With my process, I do end up cutting some corners, which helps bring down the cost, which I know is very beneficial for not only when you're first starting out, but for film photographers in general, because the main reason that you want to be home developing is to bring down those costs already. Before we go into any of the equipment, the first thing that you're going to have to do is actually shoot a roll of film. So I've actually loaded up the Hasselblad with a roll of Tri-X 400. So we're going to go out and shoot that, and then we'll come back. So now that we've exposed a full roll of film, let's go into some of the other equipment and chemicals that you'll need to develop your first roll of black and white film at home. So when it comes to chemicals, I've always been with Ilford, and specifically with their liquid chemicals. This is Ilford DDX. This is the developer that I have used for the past couple of years when developing my own black and white film. The reason I like it is because I can buy a bottle, mix it with water, and it's good to go. I don't have to worry about mixing the chemicals in the powder form with water to make like a dilution, and then using that, and then having to deal with storing like 4 liters or a gallon jug of a chemical. Because the longer that you do have these chemicals kind of mixed, they do go bad. So having it kind of ready to go in a one-shot solution, that makes it that much easier to kind of store and take your time, and not having to actually waste chemicals when you don't have a whole backlog of black and white film to develop. And what I mean by one-shot solution is once I've mixed Ilford DDX with water to develop a roll of film, after that process is done, that mixture of chemical and water is completely garbage. So you can go throw that away, you don't have to think about storing it, and then the next time you go to develop film again, you would pour straight from the solution. There's a ton out there. There's powder-based, there's liquid-based, and you can go on and on researching which one you want. The main thing that I would recommend is look at how the specific developer that you want to go with reacts with the stock of film that you're always shooting. For example, if you're shooting a lot of Kodak Tri-X 400 and you want to develop it with Kodak X-Tall, it'll look very different than developing it with Ilford DDX. It may not be a huge drastic difference, but there are kind of some nuances that you want to look into. So I would definitely recommend make sure you know what you're buying and look into how it's actually going to render your image. Another chemical you're going to need is the fixer. So I stick with the same Ilford family and I go with Ilford Rapid Fixer. It is also the same chemical that I use during printing in my darkroom. So it just made it easier just to have one chemical across the board for both making prints and making negatives. Third chemical you're going to need is Kodak Photo Flow. What it does is it acts as a drying agent, so it removes all the water when your negatives are hanging to dry so that you don't end up with any watermarks at the end of the process. Another important piece of the puzzle is actually going to be a thermometer. The reason for this is depending on the temperature of your chemicals and the room you're in, it's going to alter the developing time of your film. I know a lot of people can go above and beyond. They'll get digital thermometers, they'll get a thermometer in each kind of tank of chemicals. I just use something like this to take the room temperature, and my chemicals are also stored in here. So I don't really measure the temperature every single time. I just know that this room's generally always going to be around the same temp. And because I know that, I can just kind of stick to the same development time every single time. But definitely make sure that the space that you are in is going to be consistent. The next thing you're going to need is actually going to be a Patterson tank. What these are is they're just kind of the cylinders that your negatives will live in as they are kind of mixing with the chemicals. They'll go on these reels, so depending on the type of tank you can have more or less. So this one allows me to do 2 rolls of 35mm film at once, or you can actually expand them to do 120 film, just like so. And then some other general things that you're gonna need that I think people go above and beyond with. The first one is a funnel. It's just to pour the fixer back into a storage container because you can reuse that chemical. So just kind of grab one of these from the dollar store, the kitchen, whatever you want to use. Another thing that I found around the house is this syringe, and that is just used for the photo flow because you don't need a big mixture. You just need like a drop or two added to the negatives in order to allow it to dry properly. Another thing that people go above and beyond with are their measuring instruments. They'll get special graduated cylinders. I just have these. It's just like a general baking kind of measuring cup. I only need it really up to around 500 milliliters, so I'm good to go with that. And if I do need for some reason to add like a little bit more, I just grabbed one of these from like another cold medicine thing, and it has markings for 30 milliliters and 15 milliliters. And with these two things, I can do all the measurements I need, and it costs me nothing. You will also need a storage container. For me, I'm generally filling my Patterson tank with around 500 milliliters of chemical. So I grab these amber bottles that also fit 500 milliliters. It's really easy to kind of just transfer it in because I know it's going to be that exact amount. And then you will also need hangers. This is for when your film is completely done from the chemicals and you need to hang it to dry. I actually made these at home. It's pretty simple. They're just kind of binder clips that are bent onto a wire coat hanger. And the last thing that you're actually gonna need is a stopwatch. I generally just use my phone because it's just handy and always with me. You're gonna need that to make sure that you're keeping on track with your development times. I also encourage speakers, play some music. You're gonna be in here for probably 30 minutes for a single roll of film. So it's always good to have something like this that can kind of keep you entertained. Be careful if you are gonna be watching a movie or streaming something, because it makes it very easy to kind of forget about your times or where you are in the process. So now that we have everything we need, the next step is to get our roll of film onto our reels in the tank. I need to stress that this needs to be done in complete darkness or you will ruin your film. You don't need a special darkroom to do this. Any kind of washroom or laundry room, just a space with no windows will do just fine. And I'll show you some tips and tricks on how to set up a room to make sure it's light tight. An important part of the film developing process is taking your film from the canister or the roll and transferring it onto the reels that will eventually go into your development tank. I think the hardest part about this is actually locating a space where you can do this. My biggest recommendations for that would be to use a closet or a washroom, anything with no windows so there's not going to be any kind of light seeping in. If you don't have a space like that, don't worry. What you can do is order a film changing bag. What that allows you to do is to transfer your film onto the reels in any room because it is all sealed inside a light tight bag. But for me, this is the room that I'll generally use. As you can see, there's nothing really too special about it. You may notice that there's no windows, there's only one light, so once I flip the switch, everything goes black. But there is one area that people tend to overlook when they're selecting a room, so I just want to highlight that and show you some workarounds, just so you don't damage your first roll of film. When you flip off the lights and you think everything's good to go, there's one area I want you to check, and that's directly under the door. Although it may look like it's completely light tight, after your eyes start to adjust, you may notice that light starts to seep in. So what I've done is I've added a flashlight there just to enhance what it may look like. And I'm gonna show you when I turn off the lights and close the door, that light is still leaking in. So with the lights off, I'll now close the door. And you can see all the lights still coming in, and that light will still damage your film. The easiest way to work around that is just to grab a towel and cover up the bottom of the door. As you can see, it is now completely light tight, and it would be safe to transfer your film from the canister or the roll into your Patterson tank. For the sake of this video, I will be using one roll of film and rolling it onto the spool in normal light just so you guys can actually see what I'm doing. But again, please make sure you are in complete darkness when you are doing this. A big piece of advice I would give is that before you shut the lights off, make sure you're organized. I like to get everything ready from left to right just so I know what I need to grab is going to be next in line. So first, we're going to start with the film. We're going to open up our tank. We're going to get the reel, put it next to the film, because that's what we'll be grabbing next. Then we will be putting the reel on this kind of column here. We'll be putting it inside the tank. We'll be putting this lid on, and then we have this, which is just to agitate the film. You'll see why this is used later. So at this point, you would turn off the lights, make sure everything is completely dark, and then you would proceed. So the first thing to do in the darkroom is actually remove this outside layer of the film. Usually I'll break it ahead of time. I'll usually just kind of scratch my nail across it so it breaks it open. And the thing that's tricky with medium format is that there's this outside paper that is just covering the film. So what you can do is just kind of keep pulling it all out. And then if you see there, this is the actual film that pops out. So what I like to do is just completely pull off the paper. And as you can see, my film is automatically spooling itself. Don't worry about the paper because you don't need it for anything. And then right when you get to the end, there is a little bit of tape that is holding it on the paper, and ever so carefully, you're just gonna pull it apart. This you can throw completely out. Generally, I'll just drop it in like the sink ahead of me, just so it doesn't get in the way. And then here's your roll of film. You still have the tape on, so you're gonna very carefully grab the corner and peel it off, like so. So the next thing I would grab is the reel, and I would work around until I found these little teeth right here. That is where the film is actually gonna kind of catch on to. So I would kind of grab it like that. I feel them there. And then I loop the film and slide it into those reels right there. And then as soon as I kind of push it in on one full rotation, I kind of guide it in. And then I stick my pinky finger into the roll of film just to kind of hold it. And then you just rotate one side like this. And as you can see, the film is completely on the spool. Next thing to do, again, feeling left to right, I would grab this column, insert it into the spool, drop that into my tank. I would take the lid, put it on top, twist it shut, grab this, stick it in the middle, and at this point, you are free to turn on the lights. As long as this lid is on, your film is completely light tight. So just make sure that the lid is in there good and rotate it clockwise just so that you know it's a good seal, and then you can turn on the lights. So if you're just shooting 35mm, there are a couple of different steps that you need in order to get your film onto the spool. In addition to those steps, you're also going to need a set of scissors as well as a bottle opener. This is the one that I use for basically everything. I've just had it kind of lying around the house forever. Anything really, as long as you can pop the top of the film off like that. So with the lights off, you're going to feel around, grab your roll of film, grab your opener, and right from the top, you're literally just going to take it and pry it open and just work your way around the very top. And it'll just come off just like that. So now that the top's off, the next part is to actually pry it open a little bit. I just like to do that because I don't want to scratch the actual film. So I will go into the opening part and just kind of pry it open, just like that. And there's the whole roll. And I will pull it out. And this extra metal, you can just move to the side. So here you have your film. So this is the leader that you would have actually entered into the back part of your camera when you were first loading it. So the first thing you're gonna have to do is find your scissors, take that and just cut straight across just so it's nice and clean. So now that you have a completely flat edge, you're gonna find your reel, and just like the medium format film, you're gonna find the teeth or the kind of entrance point and insert the film. So when you get to the end, you're gonna see that it is stuck on the end, just like how there was tape on the medium format. So again, when you're in complete darkness, be very careful when you are gonna be cutting this, but I will just grab the scissors, get them ready. I'll tend to kind of pull it out just a bit, just so you have some to work with. So you can see there's that little piece I'm gonna cut. Don't worry about it being your negatives or not. There's quite a bit of space before you actually get to your photos. So you can go ahead and you can cut right there, just like so. Again, be very careful not to cut yourself. And then once it is free of that, I like to just spool it up a little bit more. Now it's all on the reel. Put it in the center column, put that in the tank, grab the lid, give it a twist, and now it is light tight. So now that we finally have our film in the Paterson tank, we are able to begin the developing process. The first step is going to be mixing your developer. Again, we are using Ilford DDX, and we're gonna have to mix that with water. Depending on where you live, the water is actually a very important part. I'm lucky that I live in an area where the water isn't super hard, so it doesn't leave any residue on my negatives after they dry. So you may wanna do a test roll first to find out if your water is okay to use. And if you do have residue on your test roll, don't worry. That just means that you should probably buy bottled distilled water and just use that for your development process. As for the directions of mixing your chemicals, it's pretty straightforward. Right on the bottle, it will actually say, on Ilford DDX, it says it's a 1:4 dilution. So that's gonna be 1 part developer and then 4 parts water. So to know how much you wanna mix, you're gonna look on the bottom of the tank. Usually do this before, but if you've kind of forgotten and skipped that step, make sure you are holding the top of the tank when you flip it over, because on the bottom of the tank, it's actually gonna have measurements of how many milliliters of liquid you need in order to develop that type of film. So for 120 film on the bottom of this Paterson tank, it actually says 500 milliliters. Make sure you double check with the tank that you're using. This is just specifically for this one. In order to find out what the dilution method is, if your tank is different, there's a great resource which I'll link below. It's called Digital Truth, and it has a volume mixer based on a whole bunch of different dilutions. You just enter the numbers you need there for how much your total quantity is going to be, and it'll do all the math for you. So to reach the dilution that I need, I'm going to first start off by adding 400 milliliters of water. The next step is the developer, again 1:4, so we're going to add 100 milliliters of the stock Ilford DDX. Before we actually put the mixed chemicals into the tank and start developing the film, there's a crucial piece that we're missing, and that's what our development time is. The best way to find this out is go to digitaltruth.com. On that website, you can find your film stock, your developer, and it brings up a whole chart, and depending on what speed you're developing the film at, it'll give you a proper development time. I just wanted to make sure that we were taking the time to properly go through the Digital Truth website, just because I know it is such a good resource when you are deciding to home develop black and white film. So the first thing you're gonna do, just like for the volume mixer, is head to digitaltruth.com. Once you are on the website, this is what the landing page will look like at the time of filming. And right at the top left, you'll see the massive dev chart. You're gonna go ahead and click that. And it'll bring you to this page. On the left side, you will see select a film. So whatever film you are selecting, choose it from the drop-down menu. For me, we're gonna be going down to Kodak Tri-X 400. And then the next step would be what developer. Again, tons to choose from, but we're gonna go down to Ilford DDX. And then you can choose if you want your temps in Celsius or Fahrenheit and how you want the time to show up. Then you click search. And this is actually what the charts will look like after you've selected your film stock and your developer. For my roll of film, I'm developing it at 1600. So I'm gonna move down the ISO column, find 1600, and I know I wanna use a 1:4 dilution, and that will equal 14 minutes for 120 film at 20 degrees Celsius. If the chemical is significantly hotter, it will actually develop faster, so that 14-minute mark becomes a little bit inaccurate. So just to recap, once you've selected your film, your developer, go to the dilution method you want to choose. For me, I'm doing 1:4. I know it's 1600 ISO, and I'm going to be developing it for 14 minutes if my chemicals are around 20 degrees Celsius. So now that we know our development time is going to be 14 minutes, this brings forward another important tool that we're going to be using in this development process, and that's just going to be your phone. Is you can actually use the stopwatch function on your phone to keep track of the time to make sure that you're keeping pace and developing the film properly. So now that we have our chemicals ready, our stopwatch ready, our film is in the canister, let's go ahead and pour this developer into the tank and we can start the process. Really simply, don't overthink it too much. You're just going to take it and pour it straight in. I generally aim to get most of it dead center just so none of it stays on the top layer of the lid. So when you pour in your chemicals, for the first whole minute, you need to agitate the film the entire time. So that means just to kind of keep it moving constantly. So you can swish it around like this. You can just turn the center column like this, as long as the film is kind of being moved around. Some people even do a method where they completely invert the canister, but for me, I didn't find it necessary and I just kind of move the center just because it's the easiest to do for me. At the end of that first minute, make sure you tap the canister on the bottom like this. And the reason for that is it breaks off any bubbles that the film may have and lets the chemical easily get across the entire layer of the negatives. Every minute, you're also going to be agitating the film again for 10 seconds. Coming up to 50 seconds here. And there we go for 10 seconds. And that, give it a good tap so any bubbles release. And then after that, you just rinse and repeat the process till you reach that full time limit of your developing time. And also don't be too worried about agitating it too much or too little. At the end of the day, it's not going to be a big difference, but definitely make sure that you're getting those agitations in every minute. We're getting close to the 14-minute mark, so the next step would be to take that container that you used for your developer and give it a good clean, rinse it out, wipe off the inside just to make sure that it's not going to be contaminated with any more developer, because you're going to have to get ready to start mixing your fixer. So now that we're down to the final minute of developing, what you want to be prepared to do is that when you hit that development time, you can pour out the developer. Okay, so that's done, down the drain. So with the tank completely empty and no chemicals in there, we now move on to the second step of the development process, which is the wash. Some people go out and buy a specific chemical for that. I just use water. It works just fine for me. It's up to you if you want to spend the money on that, but that's one of the corners that I just cut and I still get results I like. So let's turn on the tap and wash out these negatives. So now that we've completed the wash and there's no water left in the tank, you've completely poured it all out, we can move into the third step, which is going to be the fix. You're going to start this by taking your original measuring cup, cleaning it completely out, making sure there's no developer residue, and getting ready for the next dilution. Again, we're going to be using Ilford Rapid Fixer, and just like the developer, right on the label, it's going to say what the dilution is, and lucky for us, it's the same thing, 1 to 4. So when it comes to the time that you're going to be fixing your negatives for, it ranges completely. I usually go for around 10 minutes just to be safe. And it's the same thing as before, where you're going to want to do the full minute of agitation at the beginning, and then every minute I agitate again. There's tons of different approaches, but this again is just my personal process on how I develop. So again, we're going to get our timers ready, and as soon as we're done pouring this chemical in, we can start that timer. Now at the end of that minute, make sure you give it another good tap. So I'm not going to bore you and make you watch the entire process of me fixing it. So I'm going to fast forward to the end once the fixing process reaches its time limit. So now that the time's up, we're going to be done with the fixer. But unlike the developer, you actually don't have to pour this out. You can use it a couple more times. It depends how soon you're going to be doing it or how many rolls you want to use it for. But generally, I'll keep it for probably around 1 to 3 rolls of film before I replenish it. We're going to go back to the equipment that we collected and put it to use. This time we're going to be using the funnel and one of the empty storage containers that we have. This is conveniently 500 milliliters, just like the amount of chemical that we have poured into the Patterson tank right now. So we're just going to simply pour it in, make sure it's sealed up tight, and we can put it away for storage. And now we have already pre-mixed fixer for the next time you want to develop film. So now you don't have to go and grab the stock solution, mix it with water. You can just pour this in for the fixing process and then pour it back into the container when you're done. So now that the fixing process is done, that actually means that your image is kind of fixed to the negative. So if you want, it's light safe now. You can take the lid off, even in complete light, and your film's gonna be okay. I usually pull it out just to see if I can see any of the negatives to make sure it all went okay. I don't think it's gonna show up very well in the video, but if you look carefully, you can actually already see the negative image on it, which is a really cool thing. Now that we're done the fixer, it's time to watch the film again. The main reason for this is there could be some fixer left on your negatives, and we don't want any residue once your film dries. So just make sure that you are gonna give it a good wash. We're just gonna do this exactly the same like we did last time. Put it under the tap, let the water run, and just make sure that they're really clean. So for this last and final step, it's not going to require any specific measurements. First, you're just going to be taking your water again and filling your tank until your reels are completely underwater. After that, you're going to be grabbing your drying agent, which is the photo flow that I showed you earlier. And you're also going to need your syringe. On this bottle, when you first buy it on the package, it does have recommended dilutions. I don't follow it because every time I used it, it was way too much and it always left a residue on my negatives. So now I just do it based on experience. So for 120 film, I literally just put 2 drops of this into the water. So now with that in there, you just kind of agitate it just like you've done before, just so it kind of suds up and covers your negatives. I usually just kind of let it sit in there and kind of cook in the mixture for a little bit, just to make sure that it's getting an even spread across all the film. If you notice that it suds up too much, I would definitely recommend pouring some of it out and adding more water. As you can see right now, I don't have too many bubbles, and it's usually a good sign that you don't have too much of the photo flow in there, and it lessens your chance of having residue on your negatives. After you've agitated your film that has been sitting in the photo flow, you can get ready for the hanging process. I just use these binder clips, so this one will sit at the bottom and actually weigh the film down so it hangs straight. And then I actually made this just off a wire coat hanger. I cut the two ends and bent it around a smaller binder clip, and that just holds it at the top. So it's a really easy DIY solution to making film clips at home instead of actually having to go out and buy expensive ones. The next step is just to take the negatives off the reel and have them hang to dry. There are some tips I have for this. Is definitely make sure that it is not a high traffic area. You don't want people kicking up any dust or dirt or bumping into your negatives. That could actually lead to damaging them, and at this point we want to make sure that everything is perfect. I generally use a washroom. If you have a shower curtain that goes across like that, that works perfectly. So I'm actually going to show you just how to take them off and then how to hang to dry them. I still have the photo flow mixture in my canister, so let's just go ahead and I'll dump that out if you haven't already. So after that, there's definitely still going to be some chemical on your reel and your film, so let's pull that out. Now the important thing to do is to make sure you can get as much of the water and chemical off the reel as possible. So I kind of grab it just like this and shake off as much as I can. Once I kind of stop hearing any droplets hitting the bottom of the tub, I know it's probably good. And then I look for the beginning of the film on the reel. There it is. And ever so slightly, you just kind of pull it out, just so you have it. And then you can attach your first clip. Always attach the top one first. It just makes it a little easier to hang. So now that you have it on there, you can slightly pull it out and it should just feed right off the reel. So now that we have our film on the reel like this, we're just going to simply hang it up like that and attach our bottom clip. So now with your film hanging to dry, congratulations, you are completely done developing your very first roll of black and white film all on your own from home. The next steps of what you have to do is just let it hang, let it dry completely, and then once that is done, you can cut it down to the size that you need based on your archive sheets. It is very important to make sure that you are taking care of your negatives. Make sure you do put them in there, put them in a binder, put the date, put what camera you shot on. You want to be as organized as possible should you have to come back to those photos for whatever reason. So with that out of the way, I really hope that you all enjoyed this video and learned something from it. I really hope it encourages some of you to actually go out and process your own black and white film at home moving forward. If you do, feel free to tag me. I'd love to see what you guys are doing. If you have any questions, you guys know where to put them. So thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.